The siding arrangements were awkward. To put the trucks where Toby wanted them, Mavis had to make several journeys. She started making a plan. If we used the teeniest bit of Toby's line, we would save all this bother. Her driver, suspecting nothing, allowed them to go as far as the first level crossing. A few days later, the weather changed. As the snow melted, the quarry grew busy again. Some trains were so long that Mavis had to go beyond the level crossing. Now for her plan. She would go further down the line without it seeming her fault. "Can you keep a secret?" she asked the trucks. "Yes, yes, yes," they chattered. "Will you bump me at the level crossing and tell no one I asked you?" The trucks promised. But whilst Mavis was away, Toby arrived. He decided to shunt the trucks himself. The trucks decided to bump him anyway. They reached the level crossing and Toby's brakes came on. This was the signal for the trucks. "On, on!" they yelled. Toby was away with the trucks screaming and yelling behind him. No one realised that melted snow had turned a stream into a torrent and the bridge above it was about to collapse. The rails were now like a tightrope across the thundering water. "Stop! Stop!" cried Toby. His driver fought for control. They came nearer and nearer to the bridge. The driver braked hard. Toby stopped, still on the rails, but with his wheels treading the tightrope over the abyss. Mavis was horrified and quickly came to the rescue. Workmen anchored Toby with chains while she pulled the trucks away. Then she helped Toby to safety. "I'm sorry about the trucks," said Mavis. "I can't think how you managed to stop them in time."
James bustled in.
"What's that, Duck?" he snorted. "Are you afraid of bees? They're only insects after all, so don't let that buzzbox diesel tell you different."
His name is Boko, and he didn't.
"I wouldn't care," interrupted James. "If hundreds were swarming around, I'd just blow smoke and make them buzz off."
Buzz, 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 retorted Duck. The next morning, James arrived at the station to collect his coaches. The passengers were excited and keen to get on board. The platform was crowded and the porter was in a hurry.
"Mind your backs!"
he shouted.
Then there was trouble.
The beehive fell and broke open. The station cleared like magic. James heard a familiar buzzing. The bees were too cold to be cross, so they buzzed around the fireman hoping he'd mend their hive, but he didn't understand, nor did his driver. So the bees turned to James. His boiler was nice and warm.
"Buzz off! Buzz off!"
hissed James. One bee burnt his foot. "Ooh, ah, phew, phew!" The bee thought James had burnt him on purpose. So it stung James right back on the nose.
"Eee!"
Whistled James. He had had enough. So had his fireman and driver. They didn't notice till too late that they had left all their coaches behind. They tried everything to get rid of the bees. First, they spun on the turntable, to no avail. They tried washing them off, but the bees clung harder to James's warm boiler. Then they tried smoking them off by going through a long tunnel. But still the bees wouldn't go away. "It's no good, James," said his driver. "We'll just have to go back to the orchard and fetch another hive." James's reply was drowned by the sound of buzzing. The vicar was waiting anxiously for James. When he arrived, the bees swarmed straight into their new home. "Come on, James," said his driver. "What you need now is a good hose down." Later that evening, James was resting in the shed when the vicar came to see him. "Thank you for saving my bees," he said. "It's a pity it's not Christmas, then we could call you James the Red-Nosed Engine." Everyone laughed, even James, but instead they decided to call James the Bee's Knees, which means they thought he was more useful than ever. Percy and Duck like working at the harbour by the sea. On a clear summer's night, there is no better place to be. The big ships bring passengers. Cargo ships carry machinery and other things. Duck and Percy puff backwards and forwards with the crates of cargo as they are loaded and unloaded by the quayside. One morning, Duck and Percy noticed that the horizon was packed with sails flapping against the blue sky. "I wish I could sail to faraway lands," sighed Duck. "Engines can't go sailing," snorted Percy, "because engines can't float." Duck still had his dreams. Suddenly, they were rudely interrupted. "Wakey, wakey!" hovered Harold. "I'm looking at the boat," replied Duck. "That's the regatta," whirred Harold. "Lots of boats, lots of races, great fun. I hover round in case I'm needed." "Do you go to the horizon?" asked Duck. "Yes, and beyond." "I didn't know there was a beyond," whispered Percy. "Do you go to other places at sea?" continued Duck. "Certainly. I can land on ships, you know, anywhere, anytime. Goodbye." Duck sighed. He went on talking about the regatta all day. Percy lost patience. "Well, Duck, I'd rather have my wheels on solid ground. Our rails can take us to all the places we could ever wish to see." "That's an emergency," called Duck's driver. "I'll check with the harbour master." He returned with bad news. "A man taking part in the regatta has hurt his hand. We're to take him to the hospital at the next station. Harold's bringing him now. Come on." "Good to see you again, Duck," whirred Harold as he landed carefully on the platform. The man was gently helped to safety. "My job is to stay at sea in case of other emergencies. Otherwise, I would take this gentleman to hospital myself. Must fly. Goodbye." Duck set off on his journey. Soon he was steaming well and his wheels were thundering along the track. When they reached the station, the man thanked everyone and Bertie got ready to take him to hospital. "You look splendid flying along the line, Duck," glowed Bertie. "No wonder they call you Great Western." Percy's right, Duck thought to himself. Engines are happiest when their wheels are firmly on the rails. That night, Percy and Duck stayed a little longer at the quay. The air was warm and the sea calm. "There's a shooting star," said Duck. "Don't be daft," laughed Percy. "It's Harold. Look, he's hovering overhead." Something fluttered down towards Duck. His driver caught it. "It's a flag from the regatta. Harold's giving it to you as a present, Duck."
That was kind of Harold, whispered Duck. He may have whirly arms instead of wheels, but he seems to understand just what an engine needs. Duck still wonders about the lands beyond the horizon, but he enjoys being with friends most of all, and I think he knows that sometimes the best travels are those we can... At last the day's work was done. The twins now became excited. They were going to use the turntable for the first time. Bill went first. "This is fun," he shrieked to Ben. He didn't want to move off at all. The foreman stopped the turntable. "Please make way for the other engines," he ordered. Bill did so, but unfortunately the foreman had accidentally stopped the turntable in the wrong place. Bill was on the wrong track, and there was Ben puffing directly toward him. The engines came to a grinding halt. They gazed grimly at each other. "I was here first," said Bill. "But you're in my way," protested Ben. "You'll have to back up again." "I won't." "You will." "I won't." The Fat Controller came to stop the noise. "If you don't behave, I shall not allow you here again." The next day, Ben was still grumpy. "That Bill, imagine getting in my way on the turntable. He's a really silly engine." "The way I heard it," sighed Boko, "it sounded like you were both to blame." "Pho, you must have heard it all wrong." The twins grumbled about each other all day. Even kind Edward lost patience. "All this grumbling spreads bad atmosphere in the yard." "You're quite right, and that's why I've come up with a plan." Boko whispered his plan to Edward. Then his driver told the Fat Controller. "I'll start making arrangements straight away." The next morning he called Bill and Ben into the yard. "Boko is taking a special train to the harbour. His regular heavy goods train is waiting on the siding. You can pull it together." But, protested Bill and Ben, who were still not speaking to each other. "Good, I knew I could rely on you two." "I'll take the train myself," huffed Ben. "Go right ahead," said Bill. Ben was coupled up to the train of trucks, but they were too heavy for him to move alone. "Go on," teased Bill. "I can't," said Ben. Then suddenly both twins laughed. "I don't think we'll take turns this time, Ben," said Bill. "I think we'd better pull together." Ben was delighted. It was good to be helping each other. Best of all, it was good to be friends again. He was just shunting, ready for his return journey, when... "That sounds like a steam engine," he thought. The hiss came again. "Who's there?" asked Douglas. A whisper came. "Are you a Fat Controller's engine?" "I improved it." "Thank goodness. I'm Oliver, and I'm with my brake van Toad. We've run out of coal and have no more steam." "But what are you doing?" "Escaping." "From what?" "Scrap." Douglas shivered. Then he remembered Edward's story about saving Trevor. "I'll be glad to help you," he said. "It'll have to look as if you're ready for scrap, and I'm taking you away." The drivers and firemen agreed to help too. Everyone worked fast. "No time to turn around," panted Douglas. "I'll run tender first. Come on." But before they could clear the station, they were stopped. "Aha!" exclaimed the foreman. "A Great Western engine and a brake van too. You can't take these." "Ah, but they're all for us," said Douglas's driver. "See for yourself." The foreman looked all over Oliver. "Seems in order. Right, away guard."
It's a neat thing, puffed Douglas. We've had worse, smiled Oliver.
And they forged ahead.
It was daylight when their journey ended. "We're home," cried Douglas. "Shh," said his driver. "There are the works. We'll find a place for Oliver." Oliver said goodbye and thank you, and Douglas puffed away. The next day, Douglas told the other engines all about Oliver.
"The Fat Controller will have to know," said James.
"Douglas should tell him at once," added Gordon. "Well, here he is," said a voice. "Now, what's this all about?"
"Beg pardon, sir, but we do need another engine." "Yes, sir," ventured Gordon. "A steam engine, sir."
"I'm afraid that unless one is saved from scrap, there's little hope."
"But, sir," burst out Douglas, "one has."
"Yes, indeed. And thanks to you, Douglas, he is now at our works. Oliver is just what we need for Duck's branch line. Trucks."
The other engines warned Oliver, but he took no notice. "You think I can't manage?" he said huffily. "Gordon knows better. He says I'm sagacious." "You may be good gracious, or whatever you call it, but trucks can be troublesome and—"
"Say no more, Duck," interrupted Donald.
"It's maybe a pity, but the wee engine will have to learn for himself." Oliver pulled some loaded trucks to a siding and pushed the empties to the chute. Then he came back to take the loaded trucks away. They were comfortable and didn't want to move.
"What right has he to poke his funnel in here?" they grumbled. "We want Duck, or Donald, or Douglas."
"Look sharp," puffed Oliver. "That's not the way to speak," hissed the trucks. "We'll pay him out." Oliver heard nothing. The trucks moved smoothly at first, then suddenly Oliver felt them push forward. His driver applied the brakes, but they were useless against the surging trucks. "On, on, on!" yelled the trucks. Oliver fought hard, but still they forced him on and on. At last the trucks grew tired. "I'm winning," gasped Oliver. But it was too late. Oliver lay, bruised and bemused, bunkered down in the turntable well. Duck surveyed the damage. "Hello, Oliver. Are you being a good gracious engine? Beg pardon, of course, but we really don't like this sort of surprise. Donald and Douglas will miss their turntable until it is mended." That evening, Oliver was hauled gently to safety. "I'm sorry, sir," he said to the Fat Controller. "I should have listened to Duck's advice. I don't feel good gracious, whatever it is. I just feel silly."
"Well, Oliver," replied the Fat Controller, "now you know the damage trucks can do."
"Yes, I do, sir," groaned Oliver. "I look like a load of scrap iron."
"Ho, ho. Oh, I don't think so," laughed the Fat Controller. "But you do need to go to the works to be mended."
The other engines now felt sorry for Oliver. "The branch line won't be the same without you," whistled Duck. "Come back soon." A few days later, Oliver did come back. His coat gleamed brighter than ever. He was a wiser engine, too, and never made a mistake about trucks again. "This is easy," they said to each other. "We know all about trucks." But I'm afraid they didn't. "No need for that," shouted the trucks as the twins pushed them into place. "We'll show you around. We want to help." "Thank you very much," said Bill and Ben. The trucks giggled and began their tricks. Evening came. The yard was in a dreadful muddle. The twins had let the trucks tell them where to put things. Gordon and the passengers waited impatiently outside the station while Bill and Ben tried to sort things out. But by the time Gordon was able to leave, it was very late indeed. Next day, the twins were working at the quarry again. "That's a strange noise," gasped Bill. "I've never heard a noise like that before." "I have," whispered his driver nervously. "It sounds like a rock slide to me." Then came the alarm. "Danger! Clear the quarry!" shouted the quarrymaster. Workmen scrambled into the trucks. "Thank goodness we're here," said the twins. They were just puffing out of the quarry when, "Help! Wait for me!" A workman had been left behind. Ben waited as the man climbed quickly aboard. The twins left the quarry just in time. Everyone was safe, but rubble lay all around. "Oh dear," said Bill, "this wasn't our fault. I hope the Fat Controller will understand." And indeed he did. The next day he arrived with Edward.
Bill and Ben, you still have a lot to learn about trucks, don't you? But you acted quickly and bravely in an emergency. So, 3 cheers for Bill and Ben, our heroes. Hip hip, hooray, hooray, hooray.
"Oh, thank you, sir," said Bill. "Being called heroes, well, it's a really nice surprise," laughed Ben.
Really reliable. That's me, panted James proudly. Pity the same can't be said for Percy. Peep, peep. Goodbye.
"What was that about?" gasped Annie and Clarabelle. "That was trouble. Trouble for James. Just wait and see." Percy was back in the yard and busy shunting. He had the trucks in good order and was making up for lost time. But the station master had bad news. "What's happened?" asked Percy's driver. "James's brakes have jammed. We need Percy's help right away." Percy quickly set off to the rescue. He found James stuck on the line and looking glum. Percy couldn't help laughing. "Got yourself in a jam, eh, James? What you might call a sticky situation." "Be quiet," said James. "It's not funny having jam brakes." "And not very reliable either," teased Percy. "I am surprised you let it happen, James. Nothing should stop us engines." "That's enough, Percy," said his driver. "Can you push these trucks?" "Of course I can," whistled Percy. "There's no time to lose. James has done too much of that already." James angrily hissed steam as Percy was coupled to the trucks. "Off we go," said Percy. "I'll have to go fast to get there in time. These big engines are so unreliable." "Be careful, Percy," called his driver, but Percy was in a hurry. He didn't see that the points had failed and that he had been diverted into a siding. "Look out, Percy!" shouted his driver and applied the brakes. But it was too late. The driver and the fireman had jumped clear, but squashed fruit squirted all over Percy. The Fat Controller arrived.
Percy, you are not to blame for the points failure, but I do not run a jam factory.
"Yes, sir. No, sir." And Percy squelched sadly away. That night, the shed was silent. James and Percy felt very sorry for themselves. At last, Thomas spoke. "You know," he said to no engine in particular, "there's more than one way to get jammed. We all learned that today." Still there was silence. "What's more," continued Thomas, "we also learned that sometimes when engines help each other out of a jam, things can still go wrong. So," said a voice. So finished, Thomas. That means we learned a lot today, and therefore then came